Centre for Inquiry, Canada's premier venue for secular humanists, atheists, skeptics, and free thinkers.
Justin Trotier is the Executive Director of the Centre for Inquiry Canada and the past President of the Free Thought Association of Canada and the Canadian Secular Alliance. As an outspoken advocate of freedom of expression, science education, church-state separation, and equality rights for non-believers, he has the pleasure of representing freethinkers regularly on The Michael Koren Show, as well as in the National Post's Holy Post. He also contributes to Free Inquiry and Skeptical Inquirer magazines. So tonight he'll be talking about his experiences being the token non-believer on various media outlets. So please help me in welcoming Justin Trotier.
Thank you, Pam. I had to chuckle silently when she described my appearances on the Koren Show as my having pleasure. Because if you've seen me on there, the pleasure is mostly on Koren's side, I think. But it is true that I do enjoy myself quite a bit in this job, which doesn't really feel like a job. It actually is very, very fun and exciting. So I'm going to tell you a bit about my experiences doing what I do. And I'll just go back to the beginning here. Oh, you're not the Guelph Atheos? Well, I apologize about that. This is a version of a talk that I gave earlier in the week at the University of Guelph, which was rather interesting. It was the first time that I wasn't talking to the choir, actually. There was quite a bit of opposition, and in fact, some hecklers showed up. One in particular who, throughout the conversation that I was trying to have, took it upon himself to interrupt and make rude comments and that sort of thing. So I was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, I try to be a champion of free speech and free expression, but I also kind of needed to get through my talk. So I did my best diplomatically to encourage my friend to leave his comments till the end. He didn't really agree with that either, so he continued to heckle, but it made for an interesting and rather different sort of evening. So today, if you have comments, feel free to put your hand up. I'm happy to hear them. I just kind of want to get through this talk, and we can definitely have a conversation later. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Part of what I talked about on Wednesday at Guelph was what CFI is all about, and I think most of you are familiar. Many of you come to the events. Pam's done a good job of talking about sort of activities that we do. If you aren't familiar, very briefly, these are the key areas that CFI is involved with. This might provide some context if you're not familiar with what we do for what it is that I'm a spokesperson for. We are an educational charity, registered nonprofit charitable organization that can give out tax receipts to donors. Wink, wink. And what we do as an educational charity is promoting secular humanism, skepticism, and freedom of thought. We also do campus outreach. So the event at Guelph on Wednesday was part of that. We helped to actually helped to found and now to sustain a growing network of over 30 campus groups from coast now to coast. We finally have a group in Newfoundland as well. And we do social and community, yay for Newfoundland, I see one hand up there. And we have social and community services that we do here, which you can find out more about. There are various brochures along the side. These are important. One of the few of the questions I got on Wednesday were about, okay, so you do all this good political activity and you represent atheists and all of that, but so what? What are you doing with all of that if you're not providing an alternative? And what we're trying to do is not just be a political force and a secular advocacy force, but also a community that would try to build a community for people that are free thinkers. So we do that through social community services, social activities, and that sort of thing. And we do multimedia initiatives. As many of you know, we have a YouTube channel that has a lot of great content, podcasts, that sort of thing. And yes, we do a lot of politics, and a lot of that is what you're going to be hearing about today, because that tends to get the media coverage more than anything else. And by major outreach projects, I'm referring there to, say, the Atheist Bus Campaign and things of that sort that get a lot of attention, the spotlight squarely on secularism and atheism. So, is this you? This, I don't think, is me, but this is sort of the stereotype, I suppose, of atheists. I believe this cartoon actually was created by an atheist, but it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek caricature of him or herself, I suppose. But I think that atheism can be as cool as my puppy. I'm sorry, I took this picture and I thought it was so adorable I needed to find a pretext to show it to you. So that's the pretext. Atheism can be cool, and I think that the time to make it such is now. And we do that by taking on very important issues, issues that get a lot of people sometimes worked up, but I believe are rather critical and foundational to our contemporary society. So what does it mean to argue atheism? Well, I used the term arguing atheism when I titled the talk because it was a bit tongue-in-cheek. A lot of the time, regardless of all the great things that I think we do, and I mentioned some of that already, the media tends to focus on the atheism as if all we do is argue atheism. But we do so much more. Nevertheless, in order to get the media attention for the talk, I called it arguing atheism. But we do a bunch of things, and what arguing atheism I think comes down to is arguing naturalism over supernaturalism, as represented in the top row, arguing science over pseudoscience or alternatives to science. The middle row is sort of symbols for homeopathy and alternative medicine, and this keeps falling down. 1 second. And thirdly, just kind of a catch-all, it's arguing skepticism over credulity. And those are the symbols, I didn't know they had symbols, for the New Age movement, various representations thereof. So it's really taking on a holistic enterprise of arguing critical and skeptical thinking over supernaturalism, obscurantism, pseudoscience, credulity generally. So what I wanted to do go through briefly various experiences that I've had touching on, each of these three areas. And what I'm going to do is talk about the following. I'm going to talk a bit about the atheist advocacy, because yes, we do some of that. I'm going to show you a clip from Faith Journal, which was a good representation of atheist advocacy. I'm going to show you a clip from, or rather an audio clip from a radio show that I was on a few months ago called Strictly Right Radio, which will talk about the church-state advocacy side of things. Then I'm going to talk about sort of related issues by reference to the Michael Koren show, where we talk about all sorts of things that are tangential to atheism proper, things like ethics, social policy, freedom of speech, those sorts of issues. Then I'm going to talk briefly about the community building, which I mentioned earlier is something that we sometimes forget about, but is important. Then I'm going to move on to the paranormal, that other side of what I think it is to argue for skepticism and atheism by reference to a Bigfoot documentary that I was in several years ago, which was fun. And then I'll talk about alternative medicine and some recent editorials that we were covered in, but I won't give that away. That was kind of fun as well. Okay, so let's start with Faith Journal. Now, I do apologize at the outset. I'm going to be flipping through iTunes and PowerPoint, etc. So just please bear with me as we go through this. Let me just set this up. This was a show that was done over the summer on CTS, Christian television station. It's the same network that the Michael Koren show is aired on, that I'm on roughly once a month. But this isn't Koren that you see here. This is, I forget his first name, Mr. Landon, who is a Jewish man, and he hosts a show called Faith Journal, and he's had me on and other atheists a few times. And beside me there is a fellow named Aggie Smees, who runs a humanist group in Durham region. So this is, we're both pretty much on the same page on most issues, although not everything.
Don't you have any conviction? Didn't you have the guts to come and say God doesn't exist? That's his argument.
I enjoyed that. And a lot of people do think that the message is watered down, but I defend the probably and the caveat there. How? Well, because what we're talking about is a worldview. We're not talking about a certainty in God's existence versus a certainty in God's non-existence. We're talking about certainty, dogma, and faith versus critical, skeptical thinking. And at the end of the day, what I'm personally more concerned about, and I think the organizations I represent, is that people simply think, and that they think again about their cherished beliefs. And if people think again and they end up being theists all the more strongly, then fine. So
you, even in your non-belief, you have an element of doubt.
I do, and doubt and skepticism is, to me, far more important than atheism.
I hear you.
I would totally agree with the fact that the probably was
most likely, no, I don't think it was wishy-washy at all, because no one who calls himself a theist can prove that there is a God. Neither can we necessarily prove there is no God. So why not say probably and get people talking? And of course, if you say there is no God, then anyone who believes in a God is right away a little bit more offended and says, no, don't you tell me there's no God. So probably no God. Let's think about it. Let's talk about it.
United Church campaign that was done as a result of our campaign that got a lot of more people talking. They had our ad, and then after the "there's probably no God," they put "there probably is a God. Now relax and enjoy your life." And by both of us having "probably" in there, it made it more possible for there to be real dialogue, genuine dialogue between our group and theirs, etc.
I like to stop these clips after I hear a good point following my remarks, so that's going to be a pattern tonight. One of the things that I said earlier in the presentation is that arguing atheism is not just arguing atheism, and the point I tried to make there is that it's much broader than that. It really is about a different kind of worldview, a worldview founded on doubt and skepticism. And I think that that is a much more moderate position to make. So my advice when arguing atheism is to take that softer tone when it's appropriate. And in this case, I was not being confronted with a loudmouth. That'll come later in the presentation. I'll let you guess who that might be. But with somebody who was relatively sympathetic and just asking some pretty fair questions. So I thought that was a better approach to take. To be firm, yes, but not necessarily terribly aggressive. And just to point on the bus campaign, the tone that we took with that I thought was rather mature, and it did allow us to have those sorts of dialogues we otherwise wouldn't have with, in that case, in that clip I mentioned, the United Church of Canada doing their own campaign in response, and us having great dialogue. I actually was on the radio a couple times with the Right Reverend of the UCC, which is the highest position in the largest Protestant denomination, which probably wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the moderation with which we styled that campaign. There were also other opportunities for dialogue. We were on a number of public panels with various imams, in particular Syed Sahawardi, who's a fairly assertive Muslim spokesperson in Alberta. So anyways, enough on the bus campaign. If you have questions, you can surely ask me that later. I also wanted to touch on another section of this video where I was asked to comment on all the different nomenclature. So one thing about arguing atheism is that you're also arguing humanism, skepticism, secularism, free thought, because those terms end up getting lumped together a lot. So here I was being asked, being on the hot seat, what do those terms mean, and why do you have so many of them? So I'd like to play that. And as I do these, if you have any thoughts about sort of how I handled these interviews or what have you, you can save them for the end, or you can put your hand up. I do want to generate a discussion, but in any case, let me play this first.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, nomenclature that gets tossed around.
That's why I'm asking you to help me.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate the opportunity. I think at the end of the day, these names are all sort of touching different aspects of the same idea, and it does start, I think, from critical thinking, and or free thinking, or what have you. Free thought is another interesting term, but it has sort of historical justifications for it. But when you apply that sort of thinking to different areas, I think that would lead you to be, I would think, an atheist. If you apply scientific, skeptical thinking to the question of God, I would submit that leads you to atheism. If you then try to build an ethical system out of it, I would submit that leads you to humanism. If you apply it to other areas, paranormal claims, so-called fringe science claims, that would lead you to be a skeptic, and there are also skeptic organizations out there. So the Center for Inquiry, where I'm the director, is I think unique because it embraces all of those areas under the rubric of freedom of thought and critical thinking.
So anyways, let me know later what you thought of that answer, but I'm always thinking about how to resolve this confusion, shall we say, about the nomenclature, and I thought that was a relatively concise way to do it. The last clip that I wanted to play, this had to do with political activism, and that'll segue nicely into the next part of the presentation. This was specifically on the issue of public prayer, and this is something that I think we get a lot, those of us who argue atheism, which is this confusion that we're taking away people's right to be religious when we demand that there not be, public prayers led by government officials where they're not appropriate. And I think, opening up town hall meetings or legislative sessions with a public prayer is not appropriate. So let me play that clip.
I think I somewhat disagree with you on the first thing you said there, because I think people are genuine in that they feel that their beliefs are being trampled on if you can't have a prayer by the government at ground zero, for example. But I think that people are confusing what the role of the government is, and I don't think the government, in that case the U.S., or just as applicable in some circumstances.
I was thinking of the Canadian 9/11 memorial when I said that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They
even more
sucked all the religion out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, that makes more sense than the U.S.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, but I think people are confusing two things. Nobody's saying that individual citizens can't pray to God at the memorial. What we're saying is that the government of Canada's job is not to lead us in prayer. The priest's job is to lead us in prayer. I think it's a very important thing for people to realize. I don't think they'd want the government to be deciding to be doing that. Which prayer would it be? Should our elected officials be deciding whose prayer is the appropriate one at these moments?
Good argument.
That's why I'm against prayers, Lord's Prayer to open town hall meetings.
There's a bit more, but you get the point. So this does lead me nicely into the church-state segment of the presentation. Inevitably, when we're arguing atheism, we do get asked to speak on the issues of secularism or of church-state separation, and that's fair, and I like that because I think those are more meaty issues. So what I wanted to do now, were there any questions on that particular video before I move on? Okay, cool. I was on a radio show just a couple months ago called Strictly Right Radio, which, as the name suggests, is quite a right-wing, conservative, evangelical, more or less, Christian radio station based in London, Ontario. And to give you some idea of where they stand, the moderator of the clip you're about to hear was the organizer of the Ann Coulter events that sort of shook up Canada, shall we say, last week. So that gives you some idea of what I had to deal with. But he wasn't so bad, actually, on this. But let me just go back to my presentation itself. So what you're going to hear is a debate between, on the one hand, fellows named Edward Woolley and Matthew O'Brien of Media Watch, which is a conservative think tank sort of looking out for conservative interests in the press. And then on the other side was myself, and then this figure, Brittany Darcy, who was fairly useless because she said almost nothing, but apparently she was on my side despite being a campus conservative leader. That was weird. But so there were 5 of us, the moderator and then the 4 panelists. And I want to make a couple of points. The first is the use of so-called trivial issues. So the theme of the debate was, is Canada a Christian nation? And so you'd think we'd be talking about things like our foundational values, democracy, and freedom. But what ended up getting mentioned more than anything else was relatively inconsequential aspects of Christianity in our in various public places, like the supremacy of God in the preamble to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the mention of God and various religious references in the English and French national anthem. And I wanted to make the point, and I think I did it fairly effectively, that fellow atheists, in fact, often say these are, relatively inconsequential aspects of our country. We should just leave them alone. But I don't agree with that. I think that because of their the ability for them to be used as kind of wedge issues or wedge arguments to get at a much more foundational point about apparently Christianity in the founding of our country, that it's important to take these issues head on. So what I did when I was asked about that, and you'll hear that in the clip I'm going to play, is I tried to redirect the conversation away from those much less consequential issues to values. So, the argument was that Canada's a Christian nation. Well, what would that mean? What are Christian values? And I find that it's taken for granted that everybody knows what these are. But when you actually turn the spotlight back on the Christians and ask them what that means and how that would actually how Christian values could imbue a country, that they get themselves in knots trying to explain that. So that's fun. So I did that. Now let me play that clip if I can find it.
A lot of interesting things. St. Paul says, give no anthem. Giving is a day. A lot of interesting things. St. Paul says, give no thought to tomorrow.
Well, and that's actually a good point there. And I mean, I want to talk to you, Matthew. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I have a couple points on that. What a Christian nation means to me is basically what the Constitution says it means. We are, according to our Constitution, founded upon the principles that recognize the supremacy of God. Now, it's in our books. It's in our national anthem. It's in our symbols. And it's in our demographics that we are a Christian nation. Christmas and Easter are government-recognized national holidays. I mean, in 1967, Parliament declared that Thanksgiving is a day of general thanksgiving to the Almighty God for the bountiful harvest and for which Canada has been blessed. Sunday shopping is still banned in some parts of the country. I mean, we are a Christian nation through and through. We are founded as one.
Well, I'm glad that you've decided to come up with a laundry list of I would say, somewhat minor and heritage-based examples of why we're a Christian country. I mean, just for your information and those of your listeners, the original anthem was the secular anthem.
The nonsense that was trying to be turned into an argument there. So what I then ended up doing, but it's too long, I'm not going to play it, is redirecting the conversation. I talked about, luckily I had debated Michael Corrin on this exact topic the previous month, so I had done a bit of research into the true heritage of Canada. And then I'd gone further back to more interesting things, such as where notions of democracy and human rights actually come from. And I found that consistently throughout history, the progress of what I would describe as pluralistic secular democracies were opposed by the various religious leaders of the day. The best example I was able to come up with was actually the signing of the Magna Carta, which was definitely an instrumental time in British legal history, at least, when the king's arbitrary powers were curtailed. And in fact, at the time, the Pope, who I forget which Pope it was, they went through Pope so quickly back then, actually opposed the Magna Carta because it limited the divine right of King John. So I thought that was a pretty damn good example to throw in their face, and it was a very sweet moment, I must say. But let me just take a moment to talk more about church-state issues that we often argue as part of arguing atheism. And if you're more interested in these, I would refer you to the Canadian Secular Alliance, which is an organization we work with that's dedicated to political secular advocacy. So it is these heritage issues, but it's more than that. It's also the public funding of religion in the form of a tax exemption, charitable missionary organizations that do nothing but promote religious zeal are allowed to claim that as a charitable activity. So that is an issue for the Canadian Secular Alliance. So is the public funding of religious education, Catholic public schools. I always say Catholic public schools. They're not separate schools. They're public schools. They're paid for from the same coffer. So that's another issue. And public funding of religious schools is not just an Ontario issue. It is very much a national issue. Most provinces, I should qualify that, have some subsidies from 10% all the way, and of course, in the case of Ontario and Catholic schools, 100%. But many provinces have some percentage subsidy. So in Alberta, for example, where we have, as many of you know, a CFI branch, they're fighting evangelical schools getting tax breaks, something like 60 to 70% of their funding subsidized from the government. So issues like that, and we talked a bit about that. Now, what I wanted to mention, and I'm sorry I can't play a clip in the interest of time, is the tone that I took there was quite different. I mean, I was basically being argued at by 3 people for an hour. It was quite different from the TV show you just saw. So I was much more assertive, much more direct, and much more uncompromising in the language that I used. I also felt like these were much more important issues and that people took them for granted or assumed one side to be correct. So I felt like I needed to be much more powerful in the language that I chose. So that's just one element of style that I wanted to communicate to you. I think we will move on because it is getting late. Let's go to the next one. There was one experience I was going to show because it was so fun, but I think I'm going to not do it because I was young and inexperienced and my hair wasn't combed and I spoke even quicker than I'm speaking now because it was like my 3rd time being interviewed. But it was really fun because it was a debate with the then Minister of Education, Kathleen Wynne, which was kind of a big deal for the CFI at the time. And this was during the provincial election of 2007 when John Tory of the Conservative Party was proposing fully funded private religious schools becoming fully publicly funded. Do you remember this? How could you forget? And so, sorry, was there a comment? It did sink him, yeah, and we were part of sinking him. But we did make the point that he was right to identify a problem. And Kathleen Wynne at the time was speaking for the status quo that her party represented, and that was not an appropriate solution either. Just broke my pen. I'm very passionate about this issue. So in any case, so I was on a TV with her. She wasn't actually on, but her voice was on. And I like to tell this story because it was so interesting. About halfway through the debate, which was supposed to last a half hour, her cell phone rings and she has this meeting that nobody knew about, and she was gone. And I was left to essentially talk more about the issue for 10 minutes uninterrupted by her. So to this day, I don't know if that was a genuine phone call, if she actually had a meeting, or if she just really had nothing new to say. But in 15 minutes, she had nothing new to say. So I think that kind of speaks enough. Anyways, that was a hell of a good time, and that was it was a great experience. But I won't play that because you can find it actually if you want on YouTube. A lot of these videos are there. Just look up Kathleen Wynne, Catholic schools or something. What time is it? I think I'm going to skip the Corin clip as well because there's a few other clips I wanted to show. The one thing I want to get across though is with the Corin show. Michael Corin himself is very much a conservative and from a Catholic perspective, and many of the other panelists are also relatively conservative folks from evangelical or Muslim or Jewish perspectives as well. What I try to do is actually find common ground when I'm on the show, because I find that if you're just sort of giving the knee-jerk opposition to everything that the other side says, it's kind of uninteresting and expected, and it doesn't really make, well, it doesn't make for good TV, but it's also kind of dishonest, because I don't think atheists or humanists should just find their position in opposition to whatever the religious person says. I think we ought to have a series of consistent and well-formulated policies which we argue forcefully, and if they're in opposition to religious leaders, well, that's fine. But if they're, if we can find common ground, I don't see any reason we should shy away from agreeing or forming alliances. So on issues especially of free speech, Michael and myself are actually pretty much on the same page. So on various episodes, you'll actually see us coming to a consensus, which is surprising. I never thought that would happen, but I find that when you do that, then you can actually get the good graces that can come back and be very helpful in other areas where you need support from as many organizations as you can. Just to give you a kind of list of the topics we touch on, it's ethics, it's public and social policy. We talked about euthanasia. It's an issue in Quebec more than anywhere else in Canada right now. The Catholic sex abuse scandals, of course. He likes to try to defend the Catholic Church. The foreign policy, gay issues, religion and politics, which is another point that he and I don't actually come to blows on quite as much as you might suppose, because I do believe actually that it's fine to have discussions of religion in the public square as long as the public square is not biased in favor of any one belief. I think the discussion ought to happen there. It's why the atheist bus campaign was so important. It brought the discussion of religion and everything associated with it into the public square, and the Bus Stop Bible Studies folks are now running amok with their big ads on the side of the TTC, if you haven't seen these. God, why am I here? God, why am I gay? Things like that. And I'm not kidding. And, that's fine. Like, I think that obviously they should be allowed to do that. And so we were actually on TV once with the leader of the Bus Stop Bible Studies, and we were able to shake hands and at least agree that the discussion was worth having. Now, just so you don't think that I'm the only person out there, or that I only care to show you my face. I actually don't like even watching myself on TV, so putting this presentation together was rather challenging. But what I do want to do now is show you a few clips from some other folks across Canada. I'm going to show you Derek Rogers, who is not actually 11. He's a bit older than that, but he does look rather young there. And then Ian Bushfield, who is in Calgary. So Halifax, Calgary. We have Ethan now, our new employee in Vancouver, who's done a few things and actually runs his own radio show. And Kevin Smith, is Kevin? Kevin's not here. Oh, it's too bad. Kevin is, he's a resident gaytheist, actually. Kevin runs a support group called Living Without Religion, and he made some headlines actually in the Toronto Extra, the Canada's gay and lesbian news, on a feature piece that they did called Gay Without God. Because a lot of people who are coming to some of our social services are from the gay and lesbian communities. It kind of speaks to them. And Kevin is a great liaison between those two communities. And he actually, so he had this coverage in the Extra, and the title was Gay Without God, but then the front page of that issue had Gaytheist exclamation mark on the cover. Actually, I think we still have a few copies there. So I want to go through these three because they touch on some other areas that I haven't, and they show you some other faces that are representing and arguing for atheism, and I will close.
Well, the wheels on the bus may go round and round, but some of the ads on the side of the buses have come to a dead stop. The Halifax area bus company Metro Transit has refused to run ads proclaiming there's probably no God. And now the atheist group behind the ads is raising Cain. CTV's Kellen Sundall has the story.
Like this bus driver, Metro Transit in Halifax has recently run into some problems regarding a controversial ad campaign.
If anything is seen to be going to be potentially, objectionable to any race, creed, or moral standard, we don't necessarily wish to go there.
Pro-atheist ads, similar to this one, reading, "There's probably no God, now stop worrying and enjoy your life," have made their way into Canada, but they won't be seen in Halifax.
Metro Transit says it won't run political or religious ads on its buses because both issues spark controversial debate.
Metro Transit in Halifax has been the first public transit system to outright deny our request.
Derek Rogers is with the Free Thought Association of Canada, the group behind the ads. Rogers says by choosing not to run the ads, Metro Transit has taken a side.
Free speech is being sort of squelched here because it's even for people who don't necessarily agree with our message, they still want to have a dialogue about it. They're excited to discuss it.
Like the message itself, the issue of putting the ads on buses is fueling controversy.
I don't think they should be on the bus.
I wouldn't drive a bus with that on it because that's something against what my beliefs, and I think it's morally wrong for somebody to run around telling people there's no God.
There is a percentage of people in the population that don't believe in God, and I believe they're entitled to an opinion just like the rest of us.
The pro-atheist group has raised $35,000 for the national campaign. Calgary and Toronto's public transit authorities have okayed the ads. But in Halifax, there's nothing to see to believe, whatever that belief may be. Kellen Sundall, CTV News, Halifax.
To be able to speak like a newscaster, that would be amazing. The next thing I wanted to play, so anyways, that was Derek Rogers from Halifax speaking as one of several spokespeople. We actually had quite a coordinated effort across Canada, at least 4 or 5 different spokespeople in English and in French. We had a lot of Francophone media interested as well. And it got a lot of people to argue atheism for us, not just the same voices or faces. So that was quite a success. Let me play now for, by the way, just an addendum to that, Halifax has changed their mind in the sense that a unrelated Supreme Court case, but one whose decision on the limits of free speech on public transit was ruled in our favor. So Metro Transit, the authority in Halifax on the bus ads, has given the green light. So our allies, the Free Thought Association of Canada, and with CFI support, I'm sure, we'll be putting ads up in Halifax. We just have some logistic issues to get through. So kind of a victory there. Okay, let me play you now this rather amusing piece from I think actually in Lethbridge, somewhere in Alberta there. So Ian Bushfield is the voice you're going to hear. He was at the time the leader of the University of Alberta Atheists and Agnostics in Edmonton, and he's now the CFI Canada Campus Outreach Director, helping to run those 30 campus groups that I mentioned that we have from coast to coast. So Ian, in this interview, is talking about his campus initiative to end religious prayers at convocation, graduation ceremonies, and he is not being met with the most sympathetic of interviewers, I should say. So let me play you a short clip from that.
I know a few professors in physics and other places who are all on side with us.
Mm-hmm. So I know there's a special meeting coming up on Monday to hear arguments on this issue from all sides of campus groups. Time will be allotted for undergraduate and graduate student leaders, professors, support staff, chaplains, associations. Just so you know, I did have a call into Campus Alpha, formerly known as Ambassadors for Jesus, to comment on this as well. So obviously all these groups are going to have a say in this on Monday. What do you predict will happen and come out of that meeting?
Well, there's not going to be a scheduled debate portion of that meeting, so I think it's just kind of an information gathering meeting for the administration. Mm-hmm. So I think what their plan is to do is take the recommendations that they feel from there and put it to almost the general student population at the main General Faculties Council, which is a group of 180 people.
Right. Ian, you sound like a smart young person, and I'm sure all your 150 people in your group are, but, I have to ask you this question. I mean, is this something that you've always believed all your life, or is this something that as you got into academia that your values changed, something changed, or where did this all come from?
Well, I was raised in a household just north of Calgary in a farm, and we never really went to church or prayed or did any religious stuff, so I kind of grew up without religion. And then I kind of got into this setting and found a lot of really active religious groups, and I figured that wasn't me.
But when you look around, I mean, take away the religion of it, take away, what you see on the news from religious groups doing things like that, just look around. Do you think this is all there is to life?
Well, I don't know what you mean by all there is. I'm having a pretty good life without going to church.
Okay, but eventually,
world,
eventually your life is going to end. You know that. I mean, that's scientific proof that your body's going to eventually die. Yeah. And are you okay with that? That's going to be the end of your life? You could have a great life here on Earth, but you think that's the end of it? That you were just put here by whatever to just live 78 years, the average lifespan for a male?
Yeah. At the end of it, it's just all I've made of it.
Interesting. All right, Ian, I appreciate your time today and being honest with me. Thank you for your time today.
All right, no problem.
All right. There you have it. Ian Bushfield is petitioning the university to either remove the line.
After Ian left, as you can see, it went on. They took questions, and then our rather uncharitable interviewer decided to editorialize, and that was also kind of instructive. So let me play just a few more seconds.
To do, and we're going to take your calls here on Life Talk right after this.
Comments, questions, concerns? Call 780-430-9300. Long distance 1-877-827-2346. Life Talk with Wade Sorokin on AM 930, The Light.
All right, we have a full board of calls. We're going to get to as many calls as we can here after talking with the president of the University of Alberta Atheist and Agnostic Society and their petition to the university to remove the line, the glory of God and the honor of your country, which is the chancellor charging the graduates to use the degrees for that, the glory of God and the honor of your country. I do appreciate Ian Bushell coming on the program here. He didn't have to. I appreciated that, and I think it's important for us to hear sometimes firsthand from these people. We may not agree with them, but try to hear firsthand and try to decipher exactly, where they're coming from. Your calls. Let's go to Jim in Lethbridge. Hi, Jim.
I have to wonder how many listeners he actually has, because there are like 5 million of us atheists and agnostics according to recent polls, and I'm sure he has about 7 listeners. So, we could take him. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, let's go back to, not that I advocate violence, of course. And then the last one I wanted to comment on was this Gay Without God article, and I think it is important because Kevin and others involved with the social and community services, those aren't seen as glamorous. They don't typically get press attention. This was rather rare. Typically, it is the arguing atheism. That's again the tongue-in-cheek title that I gave it. But this is building a community. So I did want to read a quote from this piece where Kevin is being interviewed. Smith says the meetings are a lively mix of refugees from various faiths. He's talking about his Living Without Religion group. We have some Catholics, right-wing Protestants, Muslims, children of ministers. One woman was half an hour late because she stood outside, too scared to come into a room full of non-believers. I guess she's been told we were Satanists or baby eaters or something, he laughs. There are some really interesting stories here. One of our members is a staunch atheist, but her fiancé is a staunch Muslim. They seem to be working it out. They tease each other. We're not trying to convert anyone. You can be religious, deist, agnostic, whatever, and still attend our meetings. We're just creating a space to discuss these things. Now, with his volunteer work and photography career, he's pretty busy, but he was able to find the time to build a log cabin next to a river up north. It's sort of like my church, he says, a sanctuary to get away, to chill out and meditate. I look at the stars. They're incredible up north. but I don't attribute them to God. The universe is amazing enough as it is, and when I sit amongst the trees by the river, I feel connected to everything. We are all connected, aren't we? That's how the article ended. So that was Kevin who had all those quotes. It was quite a beautiful piece that was done. And I think that's a good point to make towards the end of my talk, is that it isn't just arguing these philosophical and political positions. It is building a community of people who, for whatever reason, have a skeptic or a naturalistic way of looking at the world and have a need for community engagement. And that's what we try to provide here. And sometimes we do get angry. And so this was last week when a colleague of mine and one of CFI's new spokespeople, Michael Payton, on the right there, was on the Rex Murphy show on CBC Radio talking about the whole Ann Coulter fiasco and issues related to free speech on and off campus. Michael is a good person to speak on that because a couple of years ago, his atheist group at York University, which is very much affiliated with CFI, was defending the pro-choice position on an abortion debate. Well, they tried to, but the debate was shut down. And Michael ended up becoming quite an interesting figure because he was championing one position on the debate, but also championing the debate. And so he was on Rex Murphy's show and at that time, and he's been on since, talking about free speech and how it's being stifled in various places, but especially on campus, of all places where it should be fairly open or totally open. So just a mishmash of other interesting experiences that many of us have had. About 30 fellow atheists and I were on CBC Test the Nation back in January. There's a couple of twins in the room who are also on, but not on our team. Bastards. Anyways, so there were 6 teams, and essentially CBC put these together as an IQ test to see which of these 6 teams had the highest combined IQ. So there was a team of atheists, which was huge to have CBC putting a whole team of atheists together, a team of religious leaders, a team of politicians, a team of twins, a team of contact sport athlete types, and then a team of, what was the 6th team? Nerds. How could I forget? They won, actually. So anyways, surprising. But we had some interesting experiences there. This is a couple of the politicians that I met. Carolyn Bennett, liberal, and then Elizabeth May was there as well. Boy, she talks a lot, but very interesting experiences, and we ended up getting into a bit of a conflict with a couple of conservative MPs from various rural districts, surprisingly. I was just basically telling them about CFI. I thought, you know, room full of politicians and fairly prominent athletes, nerds, twins apparently, why not take that opportunity to network? It seems fairly obvious. So I went to the politicians and I had great exchanges with a couple of them. They even smiled in pictures with me. They knew we were atheists. I talked to Elizabeth May, your daughter's an atheist. We had a good laugh. It was great. And then I went to these conservative MPs. I mean, I shouldn't say all the conservative MPs had a problem. Some of them, they were all pretty good, except these 2 ladies, who, when I mentioned some of what we do, started laughing. They thought it was actually sad, is the word that one of them used, that we'd have an issue with some of the political activities that we do. So yeah, that was sad, actually, that little encounter. But otherwise, it was a great show. And we actually came in just ahead of the religious leaders, which was kind of sweet. I mean, we didn't want to cream them because that would look kind of arrogant of us, and we always get labeled as arrogant. But we did want to come out just a tiny bit ahead for fun, so that was nice. I've been talking a lot about atheism and humanism, and I wanted to talk briefly about skepticism, because we do that as well. There isn't a lot of time, but I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. Recently, CFI put together the Committee for the Advancement of Scientific Skepticism, which, you know, a committee came up with the name of the committee, because look at that name. But that's not quite so bad. It's actually modeled on the SciCop, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, which is CFI's version of this committee. It's been around for obviously much longer. Carl Sagan and E.O. Wilson and other skeptics, Kendrick Fraser and others, were involved in founding that in the 70s, actually, I believe 78. And we thought CFI should have something like that to deal with bad science and pseudoscience and alternative medical claims, which may or may not pan out. So this is kind of a fast response team to deal with those sorts of issues. And it's CFI's first national committee, because it does include people from across Canada. And we had a couple of press hits. We had a couple of editorials in the full comment blog on the National Post site. We had one on homeopathy, and then a rather amusing piece, which Michael Payton, that fellow spokesperson you saw Rex Murphy interview, and we visited the Total Life Health Expo at the Metro Convention Center a couple weeks back, and we met a lot of characters. We met an immortal. They do exist. We met a lot of homeopaths. We met one fellow who was convinced that you could take minerals and smush them down and crunch them up and put them in a wand and then stir water with that wand, and then the water would cure you of everything. So I think it's stir wand is magical, apparently. So we had to write something about that. I mean, we couldn't pass that up. So I'm just going to read to you the first paragraph, and then if that whets your appetite, then the full piece is sitting there and it is still online, and you can comment on it there. The piece was titled, but not by us, by the National Post folks who title all the pieces that I submit, "If It Talks Like a Quack, ... As two self-professed skeptics, we came to the Total Health Show in Toronto this past weekend with the expectation we would encounter some obtuse ideas about medicine and health. And sure enough, we saw plenty of quantum healers, celestial healers, aura photographers, soothsayers, homeopaths, naturopaths, mineropaths, fairy communicators, chiropractors, crystal channelers, hemp farmers, and musical miracle composers. No GPs, dentists, optometrists, proctologists, psychiatrists, dermatologists, cardiologists, or neurologists. They wouldn't have been welcome there." And then it goes on. And I'll just read you the last paragraph because I finally got to take the stir wand guy to task. "It's a misconception of skeptics that we believe in nothing. We believe in evidence and rigor, and we saw little of either at the Total Health Convention. Some even showed a complete disregard for science. When Glenn Helena, who sells stir wand, billed as a, quote, quantum science-based device, was pushed to explain what that meant, he got quickly flustered and, giving up, muttered, 'I really don't give a flying fuck about quantum science. All I know is that it works.' It is this general disdain and distrust of skepticism and evidence-based approaches which moves these conventions from the realm of mere curiosity to being seriously dangerous." And that's why we wrote about that. But we didn't just do it for fun. There were some interesting patterns that emerged, and we wanted to comment on them. Those patterns include the inconsistency with which these alternative practitioners sort of treated science. On the one hand, they loved calling themselves doctor, but on the other hand, they would title their book something like "Dead Doctors Don't Lie," which I didn't really understand what that meant, but apparently it means that all living doctors lie. So he called himself a doctor, and he, I believe, is alive. Go figure. I don't understand that. But there were things like that. They love science, but then they abuse science by using its terms like quantum science-based healing rod, which makes no sense. A lot of paranoia at these things. So there was one fellow who believed that AIDS was created by the government to enslave the third world. Others who believe, the vaccine autism connection controversy. So a lot of just saturated with that kind of paranoia of the medical establishment in particular, but science actually in general. So CAS, the Committee for the Advancement of Scientific Skepticism, has both the words scientific and skepticism because we're interested in being critical and skeptical and asking for evidence above all else. And that's what was really imbibed in these pieces that we wrote. And then I mentioned this piece on homeopathy also sitting there. I won't read to you from that. This is just a list of some of the other press things that we've done. I've touched on a few of them. If you're interested in more of the religion and ethics, you can go to the National Post's Holy Post site, which is a blog for discussions on faith and ethics, which I contribute to on a fairly regular basis, speaking on behalf of secularism and humanism. So there's that as well. And recently, and I put this out on Facebook for those of you on our Facebook fan page, Kevin Smith, who you saw as the Gaytheist, is now contributing regularly to the Ottawa Citizen's Ask the Religion Expert section, providing obviously not a religious expert position, but a secular humanist position. And I actually think that today his first piece is up, so that's kind of good timing that I should give this talk. But if you go to the Ottawa Citizen, I'm not actually sure the URL off the top of my head, but if you just were to Google Ask the Religion Experts, you'd find that section, and you should see Kevin's piece there. And there are various other places where we're getting some regular, and that's what's key, is regular attention and visibility. So I was going to play you a quick clip from my starring role in a Bigfoot documentary, but I think it's getting late, so perhaps I'll skip that. Wasn't that exciting? Show it? I can't show it to you because the video doesn't work, but I can play it. I can play the audio if you'd like. reenact it? Who's going to play Bigfoot? Okay, why don't I conclude with that? That was fun as well. Just make sure I've touched on everything else. Sure. Just take this. So just to provide some context, this was some time ago. It was one of my earlier CFI days, and I was invited actually to Montreal. It's where this was some independent documentarians were producing this video, and it was actually a fairly not so much pro Bigfoot, but very pro Bigfoot hunter. It was very sympathetic to the hunt for Bigfoot. It gave a lot of airtime, almost something like 80% or more, to the Bigfoot hunters, mostly out in BC. And then they had a couple of clips from myself as the one of two resident skeptics, and then another guy, Lee Muller, who is, I believe, still involved in the skeptic movement in Vancouver. So we kind of we provided pretty good ammunition for the skeptic camp. All right, so I'm going to play you a very, very quick clip of part of this.
The Sasquatch mystery. It sort of tells you that there's still wilderness out there. There's still places we haven't trodden yet. There's still things to discover. There's still things to see. You know, there's still mysteries to solve. And to me, the Sasquatch is exactly that. It's wilderness. You know, it's the unknown. It's the last frontier, and we're trying to find it.
People would rather mythologize than just accept that certain things aren't known, that maybe one day science will explain it, maybe not. Bigfoot and monsters in general have a very persuasive power about them. They often hail from remote regions, the forest, mountaintops, that sort of thing. I think that kind of, there's an allure to remoteness, probably something to do with our evolutionary heritage. Remote areas were scary for good reason, and people have, their brains are biologically hardwired to fear the unknown, because the unknown could have, you know, a tiger there or something that we should avoid.
The one that I saw briefly was about 7 to 7.5 feet tall. It was dark in color. Hair must have been about maybe 3 inches in length. It wasn't particularly heavy in body mass. It was really lean.
I've just listened to it too many times. So the point I wanted to make there, and I guess I'll conclude with that, is back to the first kind of point that I made about, you know, being respectful and being fairly, I don't know, compromising in some sense. But the point I was trying to make was that, you know, these people that hunt for Bigfoots are not ludicrous. They're not really necessarily deranged, not all of them at least. But there is a mystery, right? And the mystery, I think, is a rather interesting one. It's why people believe what they believe. And the psychology of belief is a mystery to me, and that's the mystery that I'd rather we dwelt on or put our powers of scientific skepticism into, rather than just debunking or dismissing these stories. And I think that people do need an explanation for what they see as something extremely significant and mysterious with something that's also rather significant. And so if we can turn the conversation around and talk more about why there is this belief, that does point to something significant and mysterious about the way the brain works, the way the brain evolved to function, then I think you can make more headway in that way. And I think there's some truth to that in any case. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to take your questions, comments.
This is in reference to your talk, and you had Agus Smees sitting beside you.
Yeah.
And you both seem to be arguing that agnosticism is a respectable position. Now, this is something that I sent to you back in January. I entitled it that agnosticism is based on a logical fallacy. It's also an argument from ignorance. If one argues that God or telepathy, ghosts, or UFOs do not exist because their existence has not been proven beyond a shadow of doubt, then this fallacy occurs. On the other hand, if one argues that God, telepathy, and so on do exist because of their non-existence has not been proved, then one argues fallaciously as well. Now, this is the basis of agnosticism, which I consider a specious and cowardly philosophy, and I wonder if I could get your comments on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think that I said that agnosticism was, to me, an intellectually defensible position, because I'm not an agnostic, I'm an atheist, and I feel that, just as you've said, that logically that's the more appropriate term to use, because there's no way to prove a negative, but on the other hand, we don't ask for people to be, practically speaking, agnostic about millions of things that you can't disprove. Of course, Russell's famous teapot between the orbits of Earth and Mars is mentioned repeatedly, so I won't give you all the gory details of that, although I guess I just did. But in any case, we don't need to disprove the existence of that teapot to be moved from teapot agnosticism to teapot atheism. If there's no good evidence for an extraordinary claim, then we're practically speaking atheists, although philosophically speaking, perhaps agnostic. And the point that I kind of fall under the camp that I guess Richard Dawkins would describe as, he has that spectrum in his book, The God Delusion, where he goes from like belief to disbelief, and I think it's like a 7-point spectrum or something, and he has himself at like 6.995. So in other words, he's not like 50% between atheism and between belief and disbelief. He's much closer to atheism, but he does have to accept that there has to be that little smidgen of doubt, right? So in the case of the bus, I mean, we couldn't explain all of that on a bus, so we just put probably in there because it was much more concise and it got far more people involved in the campaign. And as I said, it was, I think, speaking of practicalities, it helped us to make the campaign more than just atheist advocacy and much more about a genuine dialogue that we were able to have because of that little word probably. So I think it was a fair compromise to make.
Well, I consider the agnostic to be an enabler of religion.
Okay.
Agnosticism is not required by atheism at all, but it is required by some people who can't quite let go.
Right.
Anyway, I've taken enough time.
Okay. Well, I think to that I would just say exactly what I just said, that I'm not defending agnosticism as my principle, but for the strategic and other reasons I just gave, that I think the bus campaign was done appropriately. Yeah.
First, I apologize for being late, traffic. Last night, often I've encountered people who have beliefs about medical things that I know I'm skeptical about. That's been quite common. But last night was the first time I ever encountered someone who believes in dowsing for bodies. For corpses, for graves. And I must admit I was completely nonplussed. I didn't know how to respond to that. And I will just lay that on you.
Oh, God.
See what you have to say.
Don't lay dead bodies on me. Wow. I didn't see that one coming. Well, I mean, do you want like a short
Keep it
answer?
Short. Yes.
I don't think I have one.
What
did you say? I'm curious.
I said, every time dowsing has been scientifically tested, every time it has failed. Every time it's been tested with.
Yeah, but you know what they'll say, and this is why I'm kind of not sure how to answer you, because it really depends on the person who comes up with this. I mean, some of them think that science can't find these phenomenon because I don't know, they are beyond the tools science currently has, or the very act of being a skeptic will bias the results. I've heard that one as well.
Yeah.
So if you get all of that, what do you say next?
Right. There isn't anything. You haven't found anything.
There's no easy way. I mean,
no.
James Randi used to have, I think he doesn't have that $10 million challenge anymore. Is that right, or does he still have it? 1 million? But he doesn't have it anymore, right? Oh, he brought it back. Okay. Well, that's good. And what he does is he forces the claimant to accept at the outset a series of scientific principles and basically tests. Like if the test results in X, Y, and Z, you have to admit that what you just did is bogus. But and to be sure, some of them do, but a lot of them will find ways of explaining it away. You know, that the scientists were themselves not open-minded or something like that, and that affected the test. So what do you do if you're confronted with that kind of nonsense? If it's somebody who won't even accept that evidence is valid, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things was the person was dowsing in known graveyards. And he said it worked for cremations as well as for bodies, which I thought was a bit startling. Thank you.
With the Halifax transit issue that you presented, it clearly seems that that you do take the stance. Well, like now. Afterwards, when you mentioned that you are an atheist, so I do understand your point on that. When you that you do clearly believe that God does not exist, but in the ads you have something to the extent you can now enjoy your life, which clearly hints that you will not be held accountable. So when the Halifax transit system rejected to put the ads on the bus, should not? Why did the issue have to be taken further? Should it not have ended right there?
Should it not have ended right there? Why?
Meaning, why did you have to push for the transit system to, and still pushing to put the ads on the buses when they said no the first time? Because of the probability.
Well, we believe in free speech here.
Well, if the probability can go either way, and your bus signs are clearly clearly hinting that God doesn't exist, so is that free speech?
I think putting just about any ad up is free speech. Maybe I'm not understanding the question. You're mentioning a few different things that I don't really see the connection. I understand that you think the ads compel people to a hedonistic lifestyle or something, like they devalue morals or something like that.
No, of course not. No.
But I thought from what you said about the focus on relaxing and enjoying your life that you were concerned maybe that the ads...
I was just going with your initial statement that we have put probability, like God probably does not exist.
Yeah.
So in other words, you can argue both ends of it, right?
No, well, we're arguing that God probably doesn't exist because that's the ad. Exactly. But we're suggesting that we are open to having a discussion, but we're still going to defend the probably doesn't exist part of that discussion. And we want to have the ads up, and the reason why we took them, well, we didn't take them to court, but the reason why we're glad that they were forced by the Supreme Court to change their mind, and we were willing to do that if we had to, was because regardless of whether you believe in the ads or not, we feel that Canadians should accept that there's a right to have that discussion. I mean, the interesting thing, I should have mentioned this earlier, is when Laurie Patterson said that they had this rule that they don't put up like controversial or religious ads, they actually had put up bus stop Bible studies ads. Those ads refer people to a website which tells them that that's the Arian Shireen ad that tells people they're going to hell. But the ads that the bus stop Bible studies people have up maybe are not quite that offensive. But if you read what they say about being gay, I think that's far more offensive than anything our ad said. What, it tells people they have to relax? I mean, it's funny. Nobody has a problem when I say that religion can't ground morals, but when I say that religion makes you anxious, my God, the gloves come off. I don't know why that's seen as so arrogant or offensive, but...
Oh no, I was just... whatever your stance is, it's your choice, and no one has the right to tell you otherwise.
So we do have to pass the next question, but let me try to answer that based on what I think you're asking, but I have to admit I'm not sure quite what you're getting at. The ad is telling people that if you're coming from a sort of worldview, a religious worldview, in which being a doubter and a skeptic entails the fear of going to hell, and that's very true for a lot of people. And I can point back to the Living Without Religion group, the people that come from some fairly radical Muslim communities, from some Mormon communities, from some Jehovah's Witness communities. There is a lot of fear. They're not relaxing when they question God's existence. So what we're saying is to those people primarily, there is no God, relax and enjoy your life. We're not saying that enjoy your life by being a hedonist and I don't know, taking drugs and doing all sorts of unsafe behavior and stuff like that. We're saying focus on enjoying your life now, because if you're a doubter and a skeptic and you believe that or you have a skepticism about the afterlife, this is the only life you can enjoy. So that's all. I hope that provides some answer to your question. No problem. 2 clappers, wow. That's not bad. That's all right. Get you later. Okay, go.
Whenever I see ads for like homeopathic remedies or herbal remedies claiming to cure, like a whole line of diseases and complications, it kind of upsets me. And I'm thinking, if these things have already been put in trials and tested, and there doesn't seem to be a noticeable effect compared to a placebo, then why isn't there an effort to put these companies out of business?
There are efforts, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think my big thing is when they make claims that are patently false. And there have been several attempts by the federal government to rein that in. Bill C-51, for example, which would have given the National, Health Canada basically, the ability to be a little bit more aggressive with how they treat lies and deception on the labeling of medical products, alternative medical products in particular. As I understand it, Health Canada already has that ability, but this would have given them a bit more teeth. And you should have seen how much money was pumped into the anti-Bill C-51 movement by people who are always complaining about how they have no money to perform tests on their medicines, shall we say. So that was a rather interesting experience.
So my next thing is, have you heard about this sort of like certified psychic thing, where the government can certify like psychics as like, I saw a commercial for that to make sure you know your psychic is certified by the government. I'm not sure if it was like an American commercial or it was.
And what agency would that possibly fall under?
So that kind of upset me too.
Yeah, we should test them. We can certify them. I like that.
And one last thing, I noticed you made a distinction between atheism and agnosticism, and I think there's a lot of atheists who would disagree and say that they're not mutually exclusive, because, like you said, you agree with Dawkins in that you're a 6 out of a 7 on the scale.
Something like that.
So I mean, atheism is like a lack of a belief in God, but doesn't necessarily mean you're a strong atheist who asserts that, or a Gnostic atheist who asserts that there is no God. There's a difference between knowing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, finish, please.
There's a difference between not having a belief and having a positive belief in the non-existence of a God.
Yeah, weak atheism, I think, is pretty much on the borders with agnosticism, depending on how you define the terms.
But they're just not. They're not mutually exclusive. A weak atheist is by definition an agnostic.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think depending on how you define those terms, you might be quite right. But I think the bigger point is to redirect conversations about atheist dogma or atheist certainty in the non-existence of God to a different kind of epistemological playing field, because my point often is that we're not opposing a belief in God with a positive disbelief in God, which is, I think, this is the point you're getting at. Rather, we're looking at the world in a very different way. We're looking at the world as skeptics and doubters, and we're simply saying that until there's evidence, we maintain a sort of skepticism or agnosticism or what have you in that question, as well as in many questions. So you can't just put them on two different poles of the same spectrum. They're sort of on two different spectrums in that sense.
Okay.
So I think I'm with you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Good point.
Just on one thing with atheism and agnosticism, I think there is a bit of exclusion. To be a true agnostic, you would have to have no knowledge or be without knowledge. So once you have knowledge of the Bible, the Quran, whatever the book would be, and that knowledge is discreditable, I don't think you could call yourself an agnostic saying, I don't know. If somebody says, is there a creator? Was there a force that started the universe or whatever? I mean, to that we don't know for sure. We can't say yes or no. If you go back before creation, we don't know what's there. But I can definitely say that the God of the Bible and the Quran did not start it. And that's where I think the difference is. So I would call myself an atheist on that, not an agnostic, because for me to call myself an agnostic, I would have to say, well, I just have no knowledge of anything.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the point I was making, that it really depends on how you define your terms. Because certainly if you define an agnostic as somebody who believes, there's different definitions, and Dawkins and others have these two ways of talking about it, and I wrote them down because I always mix them up. But temporary agnosticism in practice and permanent agnosticism in principle. A bit wordy, but in any case, so on the one hand you have, there are some things we don't know now, but we may find that information later. And on the other hand, there are some agnostics who believe that in principle the question of God is forever beyond us. So I think that I, for one, am more in the temporary camp, because I do think that science has a good chance of answering even the biggest questions, because it's answered so many already. And I think that even the question of God, though we might not really see how now, might actually be an answerable question. So I'm definitely closer to the tap than the pap, if that means anything. But yeah, if you define it as agnosticism, meaning that we have no knowledge and so it's equally likely atheism or theism, then I think most atheists I know are definitely not that kind of agnostic. But if you're defining it in the sense of weak atheism, as this guy here, I think, is defining it, then I think the two are pretty much the same. So as long as we get our definitions right, I think we're not really talking about different things.
Yeah. I guess I just call myself an atheist just because I can't say I don't have knowledge or I don't have an opinion on something.
Right.
Any religion. I mean, I use the Bible and the Quran because obviously they're the most studied, controversial. Yep. But any religion, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, or whatever, I would say any religion that speaks to a beginning, some force before, that tells us. I mean, I don't know, and no one else can tell me that either.
Exactly.
So atheism to me would be the correct term for most people. For me to say I'm an agnostic would mean to say I have no opinion on these other religions. And the reason why I'm an atheist is because I don't believe in the truth of them. I mean, that's the bottom line. Now, the ads on the transit. If an ad was put up promoting an atheist event or just promoting atheism, would they post that?
Well, they did. Which transit do you mean? The ones where they were banned originally?
Yeah. Were they? So they are accepting it now?
Yeah. Well, it was up in Toronto. It was up in Ottawa. It was up in Calgary. But not Halifax. Not Halifax originally. That's the one I was referring to, where there was that controversy, and now it's been overturned. It isn't up yet, but we've been given the green light by the decision makers. In Ottawa, it was also rejected initially, but only at the lowest level. It was appealed by Alex Cullen, chair of the Transit Commission in Ottawa, up to the City Council, where it was overturned. So that's why it ended up going in Ottawa. And then Saskatoon did one, sort of independent, but with the same slogan. So I think at this point, it's a green light everywhere. If we had the money and the resources, then we could put it up pretty much anywhere we wanted in Canada.
Yeah. Okay, that's it.
All right. Thank you. No problem. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi there.
My personal opinion is more people learn about science, the less they are dependent on religion to explain what they don't understand. And I was wondering if CFI has any advocacy in improving the quality of science being taught in schools.
Absolutely. It's a great question. I wish we had the resources to do more of that. What we do on occasion is we go into schools and we give talks about the scientific worldview. I've done a few of those, so have others. We are involved in science education to the public. We do lectures. We have that committee that I mentioned earlier. But no, as far as actually being on the ground developing scientific curricula, we don't. But we've been talking for a long time now, and Pam can attest to this as well, to work with some of our experts we have a lot of science journalists, scientists on providing a critical thinking curriculum, which could be used as sort of an after-school program or maybe a continuing education program. So that's in the works, but it's in its infancy. So if anybody's interested, now would be a good time to get working on that. We have the resources because we have a lot of people that are very keen on that kind of thing. Some of them have actually taught critical thinking to universities, but we're more interested now in providing it to younger people. So yeah, it's on our radar for sure. Thank you. Yes.
I wanted to refer to your earlier comment about the psychology of belief, and religious belief in particular. And I haven't been around this organization very long, but I have been around which is basically a non-debate in academe around religious belief and non-belief, which in a way, in the power relations of academe is long settled. The default or power position in academe is atheism. It's only in, let's say, the theological colleges or in certain, let's say, less powerful quarters in academe that this is still even being debated. And in that world, if the kind of controversy that arises in the public sphere were to erupt, let's say, that's seen, let's say, as more in the quarter of a kind of a power relations that can be relatively easily dealt with, which is one takes tactics such as ignoring the eruption, such as dismissing the eruption, such as really not giving it very much credence. And when we're talking hardball power relations, this is not people playing nice. Mm-hmm. But it seems as though those tactics, well, and in a way that cannot be taken in the public sphere, but I get the sense that a lot of what is, what is seen as the provocative, fundy position is just that. It's just merely provocative. I'm not saying all of it. I mean, certainly some people really very much, as part of their, life world, have to carry these beliefs, be it, out of dealing with the fear of death or for cultural reasons. But some of it, I think, is merely provocative. It's like the bratty teenager saying controversialist things at the dinner table just to get under daddy's skin or mummy's skin. Mm-hmm. And it's that element that I think perhaps is, and maybe there is really no means of dealing with it, but traditionally in power relations, and when one is playing hardball, one merely ignores it, one merely dismisses it, and there seems to be no really good way of dealing with that other than to give it, to energize it, to energize that, by continuing the debate, by continuing the discussion. If when we're playing hardball, I mean, if, you have, let's say, a very attractive person sitting in a bar of either gender, and let's say sexual politics is going on, and somebody comes up who's not a player and says something provocative, that person in the power position just dismisses that person, whether it's something provocative about whatever, religion. But it seems as though that element can't be dealt with in the way that in hardball one would normally deal with it.
Yeah,
just the merely provocative, merely immature, emotionally immature element.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a good point. It's something that we do tackle, is when to debate and when to ignore.
Yeah.
And especially in debates that want to be framed as science but are not in any sense science. So evolution, intelligent design very often is an example where the creationist position, creationists want to debate us and frame the debate as a scientific debate, promote it as a scientific debate, and we don't do that. CFI won't do that, but we will debate it if it's framed as a cultural debate. If it's framed as why is it that some people believe this and others believe that, but not if it's framed as here's the evidence for the two positions. So we do take heed of what you're saying. But let me just suggest that we don't have the liberties that they have in academia.
Yeah, of course.
Because the
power relations are different.
Yeah, the academic institutions are able to get on with their business for the most part, not always, without having to worry about the public perception of what's being studied. I think that's to the ultimate detriment even of the academy. So what we do at CFI and our allied organizations is we try to engage with people on the questions that involve culture and social policy and all of that, where people often have controversial positions that are, yes, at odds with the mainstream academic philosophy of the day, but nevertheless, if enough people believe them, even if they're patently wrong, and social and public policies being possibly being shaped by it, we can't allow, for there to be no voice debating it. The professors, for the most part, aren't coming out of their towers and dealing with it. So, although we have some great faculty advisors that do, but that's in a large part thanks to organizations like ours bringing them out and giving them platforms to engage and to give that balancing perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Uh-oh.
I thought I would turn your question on Christian values against you in a sense. So you talked again.
I knew you'd do something like that.
Well, yeah, I'm curious. So what exactly would atheist values or humanist values or whatever you want to call them be in a practical sense? Like you can use ambiguous words like equality or something like that, but more specifically, what does it mean? And as an example, I was thinking along the lines of with the invasion of Iraq. After Christopher Hitchens released, there was this narrative in the atheistic community that the war in Iraq was really this war of the Christian right, of George Bush and his Bible Belt followers wanting to invade Iraq.
Yeah.
But with Christopher Hitchens, when he released his book, God is Not Great, and then became simultaneously the face of atheism in the U.S., as well as one of the most eloquent supporters of the invasion of Iraq, that narrative kind of had to be dampened down a little. And just more generally also, if you look at the 20th century, there's been a very clear shift in the position of atheists towards the right in the political spectrum over the last 100 years or so. At the turn of the 20th century, really, to be an atheist almost guaranteed that you were some form of socialist, if not Marxist. Whereas now I've met at TFI everything from socialists to libertarians and like everything in there. So are there atheist values? Are there humanist values? What exactly do those mean in practical terms?
Well, I would agree that atheism doesn't tell you anything other than a position on God. So I guess when I refer to I'm not sure I said atheist values, or if I did, I possibly misspoke. I'm referring more to humanist values, what I might call secular
what are
values.
Humanist values? Is there
Well, I think they're not necessarily that different from scientific values. And what I mean by that is, how does one learn about the universe in science? We have a system which privileges certain values, things like accountability and
I don't
fallibility.
buy that, because like, what does it mean to do a scientific value? Do you bomb Iraq and then have a control group for not bombing Iraq? Like, what does that mean?
Well, thankfully I don't make those day-to-day decisions, but no, but I'm talking in a more general sense. You know, that debate that I was referring to when I made that comment was about commandment-based, just, you know, dictates that come up from on high. And I was making the point that in general, humanists don't believe in anything from on high, so our values are built from the human ground up, right? So when I refer to scientific values, I'm talking about the sort of open discourse that science allows to happen, right? So the idea that you have a fallible playing field where different people can have different ideas, but they all admit that they could be wrong, and they're put to peer review, and there are experiments. What is democracy but social sort of experiments, right? You have one government in power, they, you know, sort of do things their way, and then we decide if we like it or not, and we can kick them out and replace them with a different government that does different things. That's a kind of experimental way of doing things, which is quite at odds from the idea that the Bible tells you for all of time the one and only absolute way to create a society. So I don't know what foreign policy we should build out of that, but, you know, I'm talking more about a very different perspective on how a society gets started. Is that? It's not an easy question.
No, that's not. I didn't expect a clear answer. But
start a discussion that might lead to a way to answer that, if that makes sense.
Explain humanism to you.
Sorry.
No, I've totally lost my train of thought now. You said right at the end of your speech you were more interested in why there is belief and stuff like that, and I mean on a cultural level and stuff like that. Now, I'm sort of new to this whole thing.
Yep.
I am an atheist. However, you having had extensive time to talk to all these different religions, has there been like some uniformed reason, like whether it be evolutionary, sociological, like why you may think religion exists? I mean, it's been an evolving state since Neanderthal times.
Right.
Painting, you know, mammoths on cave walls as some sort of crude deity.
Well, that's and that, of course, the historical evolution of religion points to how human it really is, right? Like it ebbs and flows with changes in technology, social structure, all sorts of relations, power relations. No, I haven't really seen anything really consistent. And also, I guess there's kind of two parts to that question. Why did religion evolve originally, and why is it still here, since we don't live in ancestral evolutionary
is there
circumstances
purpose
anymore?
It might have? Or?
Yeah. Well, you know, there's the adaptive and the non-adaptive explanations for religion. I'm not an expert in either of those. The notion that the human brain is constructed to see agency and pattern because, you know, it's better to see pattern where there is no pattern than to not see a pattern. You know, the example is if you hear strange noises, it's better to assume that they're caused by a predator and to get away from the strange noises than to miss that predator. So then you extrapolate that, and when you hear thunder, maybe you anticipate that there's some sort of giant predator in the sky that's causing that. So that's one sort of cognitive explanation for why, maybe not detailed aspects of religion, but why agency was invented even where there is no actual agent. How you get from that to organized religions of today, that's an ongoing area of study that I'm not really qualified to comment on.
No, that's fair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Some good books on it.
Oh, sure.
Oh, one other thing.
Darwin's Cathedral, is that the other one? Okay, that's a good one too, I think.
Did you hear about the insomniac, dyslexic, agnostic? Laid awake wondering if there really was a dog?
Yes. I've heard variations thereof. And also, one other thing about why religion is still, quite pervasive. I think it has to do with, and I mentioned this, community building, right? I think that a lot of people get their social, support from the religious environments in which they have a stake in. And one of the things we're trying to do here is provide a community for people who are interested in talking about philosophy, science, ethics, the arts and culture and all of that, but come at it from a somewhat different perspective. And hopefully that kind of approach in the long run can offer an alternative to possibly supplanting religious monopoly in that area. Ed?
Yes, people that believe in a God refer to themselves as theists. We who do not believe in a God often refer to ourselves as atheists. That's the theist approach is taking a positive, making a positive declaration and using a positive approach.
Yeah.
Atheism is sort of taking a negative approach. It seems to me that we who don't believe in God should refer to ourselves as naturalists, or claim that our perspective on the world is from a scientific point of view. And I say this because the positive view has more of an impact to people, and especially when you're dealing with an audience that has a lot of people that are theists. Many of them aren't really sure that there is an alternative viewpoint.
Right.
To them, it's either God or no belief at all. But as humans, we all have beliefs. And it seems to me a better approach would be just, or for us as an organization or any organization that refutes God, I think it would be better to approach in a positive point of perspective.
Yeah, I think
and let people know that there is a definite point of view. It seems to me there's no need to even refer to God, although with an audience of theists, having this second, presenting this second perspective, I think is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. And you're in good company, because I think Sam Harris says something similar about the label atheist. He questions why we need that, and we don't use those labels to refer to non-belief in fairies for the most part, and metaphysical creatures like that. I think I think at some point we'll be there, Ed. But I think right now, because atheism is still such a shocking term, and it at least gets people to listen to you to some extent, I think it does serve a useful purpose. And since it's assumed that atheists in many parts don't exist, just stating that you are one has that instant understanding on the perspective from the other side that, oh, there is somebody who has a strikingly different perspective on God. Whereas if you used a term like humanist, which I use, or naturalist, which I use, but it doesn't have that same instant effect. And in conversation, sometimes you need to get a point across quickly. So it has good practical value. So one day, I hope we're in a position where God is not, even really talked about, except, it was that funny thing people used to believe in.
Yeah, I think you have a
had
point.
Wars over it. But for now, we still have wars over it. So
I think you have a point that people right now do understand theism more than if you're referred to science or naturalism. I agree.
Yeah, but we're trying to head in that direction. So. Dan, last question to Dan.
Yeah, I waited for the end. Two quick things in response to what you and Ed were just talking about trying to present our position, whatever it is, in a more positive light. I sympathize with, but I think there's also a danger of making it sound like the scientific worldview or something is just another religious belief, or you know what I mean, because people like to use that against us. They like to toss around words like scientism. They like to say we have
radical
our own
skepticism.
Yeah, well, right. There's so many terms. They like to think that we have our dogma just like they do, and that we have a faith, only it's a different kind of faith. Our faith is in whatever atoms or Darwin or something like that. So that's all I'm saying is I half agree and am half worried about that last exchange. But the other thing, this sort of endless debate about terms, agnosticism, atheism, I thought how can I make this more fun? I wanted to bring in one more term.
Oh.
You probably know it
No more
because you
terms.
know all this stuff, but perhaps some people in the audience don't. Do you know agnosticism?
I don't want to know agnosticism.
Oh, you're not familiar with it?
No.
Oh, I'm having so much fun. So I hadn't heard of it till the other day. Someone told me about a rabbi, actually a very progressive, liberal female rabbi, and then I Wikipedia'd it just to make sure it really existed. I'll be extremely brief. To be an agnostic is to hold the view that a coherent definition of God must be presented before the question of the existence of God can be meaningfully discussed.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I listened.
Isn't that cool? I think
point.
it goes hand in hand with atheism, but I like the fact that it puts the pressure back on the other guy. The person, someone asks you, do you believe in God? And instead of having to justify, to give Russell's teapot and all this stuff, you can say to them, which God, tell me what God is first.
Because I'm what was the word again?
Agnostic with
Agnostic.
an I. Yeah, agnostic. So there you go. There's the word of the day. That's all I wanted.
You've converted me. I'm now an agnostic.
I like it a lot too. Anyway, thanks. I enjoyed your talk.
Thank you. Thanks all of you for coming.
Centre for Inquiry, Canada's premier venue for secular humanists, atheists, skeptics, and free thinkers.
This event was hosted by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, an educational charity promoting science, reason, secularism, and free inquiry. CFI Canada coordinates branches and campus groups across the country, runs a public education series, provides secular community services, incorporates cutting-edge multimedia such as blogs, podcasts, and YouTube, and is a regular voice in the press presenting a secular humanist, atheist, and skeptical perspective. Visit us at www.cficanada.ca and contact us at info@cficanada.ca.